Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Goffstown Today, a local public affairs program that's brought to you by the Goffstown Democratic Committee. Our goal with this series of programs is to provide meaningful discussions of local and state issues important to the greater Goffstown community. Our topic today is a particularly important one, redistricting, the once-in-a-decade process of redrawing electoral districts following the federal census. It's a controversial process that's taking place in states all across the country. Our guest today is Liz Tentarelli, president of the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire, a century-old organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League influences public policy through education and advocacy and never supports or opposes any political party or candidate. Ms. Tentarelli is a retired educator who lives in Newbury and has been active in the League for more than 25 years and president of the State League since 2013. She was a library trustee in her hometown for 12 years and is also a presenter with the New Hampshire Humanities, where she offers a talk about the history of the women's suffrage movement. The League of Women Voters issues an alerts page, calls the current state of redistricting in New Hampshire, quote, partisan gerrymandering by the majority party. Ms. Tentarelli, how did we get to this point with redistricting? How bad is it and where do we go from here?
Oh my goodness, we go through this every 10 years, don't we, Len? So, but then that's a constitutional requirement. And the League of Women Voters has been working on redistricting since 2004. What we had hoped to have in place was an independent redistricting commission that would be composed of members of both parties plus unaffiliated voters who would take the decision-making or at least the design of the maps out of the hands of the legislature. Constitutionally, it still has to go to the legislature for a vote. But those plans for an independent redistricting commission, although they passed the legislature in 2019 and again in 2020, both of those plans were vetoed by the governor. So here we are with legislative committees drawing up these maps for Congress, for New Hampshire House seats, eventually for the state Senate and Executive Council seat, although we don't have those maps yet. And that committee is composed of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, because that's the proportion within the House. So we've got legislators drawing maps, and it probably shouldn't surprise us if some of those maps are drawn for partisan advantage. No matter which party would be doing it, I think we would have the same problem. So I think what I'd want to talk about first is the congressional map, if I may. And then we can talk about the Hillsborough County map and look more specifically at Goffstown and its neighbors. Does that work for you?
That would be fine. Thank you.
Okay. If we can go to the second slide, please. I just want to let people be aware that we have been very actively and very publicly working on a Fair Maps project in cooperation with some other organizations, Open Democracy, also Nonpartisan, Granite State Progress, since last April when we had a big forum on this. And our push was to make sure the process was done fairly. That is, everybody had a voice at the table, and it would be done transparently, which means it would be done in public. And I have to give a lot of credit to the House Committee Chair, Barbara Griffin, for making sure that that transparency happened. Those meetings were held in public. There were public forums. That's what we've been calling for since specifically last spring. And that has worked. So now we've actually got some maps that are being proposed that will come up for a vote on January 5th and 6th, maybe even the 7th, I don't know, in the New Hampshire House. So if we could now look at slide 5. And I had, I'm not used to having other people move my slides for me, but thank you for doing this. The reason we have redistricting is so that votes count equally in different districts. And this is mandated by the US Constitution. So states are allocated congressional seats based on changes in population. New Hampshire has 2. That's not going to change anytime soon. But change for Texas, they picked up 2 seats. Pennsylvania, California, each lost a seat because of shifts in population. So within the state, we also have to adjust our districts to account for those shifts in population. But when those districts are drawn with the specific goal of partisan advantage, that fair vote that we've worked hard for each citizen to get in the map is diminished because voters suddenly say, this is a Republican district, I'm a Democrat, it's not going to count very much, or vice versa. So voters feel that their views will not be represented. Towns have the same problem. The voters in the town need to be fairly represented. And that means these redistricting has to be done fairly. And of course, we want the state's policies to represent the diversity of the state. So I want to show you the next slide, please, which is the New Hampshire House districts. And these are the current districts, the ones, the map was drawn in 2011 in a process that I can only describe as horrible. It was done in secret. There was no real public input. Even the minority party was not aware until a day or two before what the maps were like. Fortunately, that's not what happened this time. So I know you can't read this map. I mean, these are all our 400 house districts. Because of the change in population, each one of those 400 seats, in theory, will represent 3,444 people. Now, if our towns were in nice multiples of 3,444, that would work out beautifully. It doesn't. So, we've got a plus or minus 5% going on here. But that's the theory. So as I said, this is the current map. And let's go to the next slide and go to a close-up of Hillsborough County. And you can see your town of Goffstown there. It's pink, kind of near the top center. So this is your current House district. And you have, what do you have? You have 5 reps currently, don't you? But 4 of those are elected only by Goffstown voters. And with your population, you're really entitled to part of another rep. And so you're part of what we call a floterial. So you can see that the blue towns of Ware and Deering are joined with Goffstown in another district. And currently it's called District 39. You together elect 1 rep, and that gives you your fair representation. I said I was going to do Congress first. I guess I wasn't. I'm going in order in my slides here. It's okay. So let's go to the next slide, and I'd like to show you the proposed Hillsborough County map. This is the map that the Republicans proposed because they have an 8-7 advantage in the committee. This is the map that will go to the full House in early January for a vote. And in this map, Goffstown happens to be that purple square. And again, you get 4 reps that you're going to elect. But now, I'm sorry, you're going to elect 5, but you've grown. So you are now joined with the towns of New Boston, and where. I think I said something wrong earlier. I said where and Deering. Anyway, yes, no, that's correct. So the pink towns of Ware and New Boston are now joined in a flotirial with Goffstown. So you together will elect a rep. So you're going to have 6 reps in the new legislature representing Goffstown. There are some issues with this map, and one of them is Manchester. Manchester has also grown. It should actually be getting 34 seats divided among wards. You know, the cities divide into wards and they elect, 2 or 3 from each ward, depending on how they're set up. Manchester should have 34 seats. In this map, it only has 32. And people in Manchester are not happy about that. So that's one problem. And then another problem is down in the southern part of the state, in Pelham and Hudson. If you put up the next slide, I want to show you a close-up of this. This has been a contentious issue for the last decade. The towns of Hudson and Pelham were joined together in a district. Now that district has 9 reps, but because Hudson is a much more populous city, inevitably the reps are coming from Hudson. Right now there are 7 from Hudson and 2 from Pelham. Although the towns are not that different in population, Pelham's about half the size of Hudson. So poor Pelham has been petitioning the legislature to separate us and give us our own rep. They are entitled to their own rep based on a 2006 amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution that guarantees any town that's large enough to have its own rep shall have its own rep if it is feasible, if it can be. Sometimes they have to be joined with little towns nearby, because little towns aren't big enough for their own reps. But in the case of Hudson and Pelham, the only reason they were joined together was partisan advantage. So if we, I think I won't bother going back on a slide, but I will say in this 2021 map, Hudson and Pelham are finally separated. Pelham gets its own rep. Hudson is joined with the little town of Litchfield to the north, which needed a friend. It needed to link up with a larger town. So that's basically the situation in Hillsborough. And I do want to talk about the congressional maps next, but Len, do you want to ask me any questions at this point or go back on any of these maps?
I would say no. I think that we both know the congressional map, particularly the strange contortions that they've done to wrap the second district around the first district, or however that's done, has been what's drawn most of the attention, I think, both in the state and on the national level. And I think I'd really like to talk quite a bit about that.
All right, so let's put up the next slide, which is the current congressional map. And so this is the map we've been operating under for the past 10 years. And District 1, you can see, I mean, it's a weird shape already, but it goes where it has gone for over the last 100 years. It's been roughly this size. It's been tinkered with on the edges as the population shifts. And what happened with the 2020 census is we realized most of the growth in New Hampshire occurred in the southeast corner of the state. So that area is going to have to geographically shrink on a map in order to balance the 2 districts. So this, as I said, is the current map. And if we go to the next slide, this has actually been a very balanced kind of map. We're a purple state. We have about equal number of Republicans and Democrats, and then a much larger number than either of those of undeclareds. But you can see that, and this started in 1981 at the top there. We had a Dem in one, a Republican in the other. Then we had a strong period of Republican, and it switched back to Dem, and it's gone back and forth. And now we've had several cycles where it's primarily Democrat. But the two districts go back and forth. That big black line indicates where the last redistricting was. And at that time, the two sitting congressmen, Charlie Bass and, I'm blanking, Frank Inta, right? Thank you. They kind of drew up this map so that the two districts would give each one about an equal chance. They weren't trying to manipulate anything. And then the legislature approved that map. The interesting thing is, in the next election, they both lost their seats. So they thought they were doing something fascinating. It didn't quite work out. But the seats have been competitive, as you can see from the red and blue coloring of this chart. So let's go to the next map, which will show you this congressional map. This is the map that's proposed by the Republicans. It's a very different shape. I'm going to show them to you side by side in a minute, but let's look at them here this way so you can see it a little more clearly. What they did was take that whole strip along the eastern seacoast and even the eastern border with Maine and moved it into Congressional District 2. And then they took a number of towns along what I consider the Merrimack River border, that southeast border with Massachusetts, and moved them into District 1. There were some interesting explanations of why they were doing this. But what it did was move either 75 towns or city wards combined from one district to another. That's a lot to be moved. And in fact, it's 1/4 of the state's population have now been moved between districts. It makes District 2, the turquoise one on this map, much more strongly Democrat. And it makes District 1, the dark blue one here, lean Republican. So they're no longer competitive districts. So let's go to the next slide and look at these back side by side. So on the left, we've got our existing map. On the right, the proposed congressional map. And you can see the rather extreme difference in this. That whole strip along the Maine coast, along the seacoast, and then part of the Maine border have shifted out of District 1. And all I can say is those towns along the seacoast are Democrat towns: Portsmouth, Somersworth, Durham. They're now in District 2. That's what makes it so heavily Democrat. We had it when in the current map, some of the rural areas were in District 1, weren't they? If you look up there, going up towards the North Country, it doesn't go way up north, but those are some of the rural towns. And so our Congress people had to understand both urban and rural needs and issues. When I look at the new map, I don't see that balance of urban and rural as much anymore. I see the very developed Southeast being its own district, and the rest of the state is kind of the hinterlands almost. Which is, I'm in the hinterlands, so forgive me if I say that. But.
Well, let me pose a question, and I don't know if there's really an answer to it. To use our governor's own phraseology, did any of their explanations for this kind of redrawing pass what he refers to as the smell test?
Not in my opinion. When the map was presented, one of the reps from Manchester, who I think was a driving force behind drawing this, said, Manchester needs to be linked to the towns south of it. So it said it has to be linked to Litchfield because they have things in interest, and Litchfield is next to Hudson. So Hudson has to be brought into this district. And Hudson is very close to Pelham, so let's bring that in. I mean, that's not a lot. And so I'm sitting in the committee room and I'm humming to myself, the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, thigh bone's connected to the knee bone. And I'm thinking, where are we going with this? And so they gave strange reasons. And it was just very clear to everybody when we got our first look at this, that they are trying to give some partisan advantage to District 1. Now, do you remember last January when there was a bit of a hoopla when the Republican state chair, Stephen Stepanek, I'm not sure how he pronounces it, said, we are the majority in the legislature. I can guarantee that we will have a seat in Congress in the next election, because he wanted a drawn map. Now, the people on the committee said, we don't take our orders from Steve Stepanek. I'm sure they don't. But this is what they did. They drew a map where District 1 is more likely, it's not certain, it's more likely to go Republican, certainly more likely than it was.
And meanwhile, District 2,
If you were
Annie Kuster could be there for a much longer time.
absolutely. So if you're a Republican in District 2, you're going to look at the congressional election and say, why bother? And that's what's wrong with gerrymandered maps. It discourages voting. If you don't think that your candidate stands a chance, why vote? That's the real issue. Why be involved in politics at all if the candidate who represents your point of view doesn't stand a chance? So that's kind of where we are. Do you want to quickly, I don't know how much time we have. Do we want to quickly look at the Senate? And I mean, not that I have new maps, but just talk about it.
I'm more interested, and I think that, from the town committee's standpoint, we've been fighting the good fight for a long time, but the way things seem to be drawn in Goffstown, we end up with 5 Republicans, no matter what we do or how good the candidates are. I wonder sometimes, I know that the Floterial district that we seem to end up in has been a big portion of that. And it seems from what you said now they've switched. I believe the Floterial used to include Ware and Deering, and now we've taken out Deering, attached them to somebody else, and now it's going to be Ware and New Boston.
Both of which currently have all Republican reps as well. So
Okay.
yes, so I mean, and you can't say that's gerrymandering, because those towns near you happen to have more Republicans than Democrats, as Goffstown does. But it means that, if your party wants to change that, they are really going to have to come out in numbers and vote. It's all a get out the vote activity next fall.
Well, is there any real hope for changing anything when the full legislature votes on it, given the dynamics of what goes on in Concord? Is there a snowball's chance in a hot place for any changes?
I think there is on the congressional map. I think there are enough people upset that we have talked to some moderate Republicans who say, we don't like this obvious gerrymandering. So I believe it is possible, if the turnout is right, if all the Democrats go to the session, and if all the moderate Republicans we've talked to go to the session and vote no on the congressional map, then some kind of compromise map should be drawn up. I'm not saying they will vote for the Democrat map, because I don't think that'll happen. And the Democrats proposed a map which changed the district by only one town. They moved Hampstead, which is down south, and that out of District 1 into District 2, and that balanced the population perfectly within 50 people. But I don't think the Republicans are going to go for that map. So if they vote no on January 5, 6, or 7, whichever day they get to this, if they vote no on the GOP proposed map, then work needs to be done to create a map that could get the support first of the Senate, because it will go then as an amendment to the Senate, and then back to the House for a vote. So there is a chance on the congressional map. On the county maps, the House maps that one per county, I don't think we're going to see changes. And some representatives and some parties are happy with it. We still see a problem that towns that deserve their own rep didn't necessarily get it. They were joined with other towns when they didn't have to be. The one that irritates me the most is Berlin up north. That's the only city up north, for heaven's sakes. They have enough population to have their own reps, and they should. And yet they were linked with a nearby town that could have been linked with other nearby small towns. But Berlin was linked with that town because it's primarily a Republican town in order to influence the Berlin vote.
How not surprising. Let me ask this somewhat facetiously. Do you think there's any chance Sununu would develop a sense of smell?
I think so. I mean, he's got to run again next fall. And he has made public statements about gerrymandering. And I think it would be the congressional map, though, that he might object to. He might send them back to the drawing boards on that if the GOP map goes through.
Well, I appreciate the time and the expertise that you've given us today. I could go on about this at considerably more length, but
so could I.
Your enthusiasm is obvious, and we thank you very, very much for participating today. Perhaps we can convince you to come back again for another visit after the votes in January and see maybe where things are at that point.
That's fine. I'd love to. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for being with us today. We appreciate you tuning in to Goffstown Today. You'll be able to see this program airing here on Goffstown TV. We show these programs on the Town Democratic Committee website, goffstowndemocrats.com. We also occasionally air them on our Facebook page. Please watch them, share them with your friends and neighbors, and share them widely with the community. Thank you very much.